Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's exciting webinar, Succeeding in a World Where the Future of Energy Disrupts Everything. I'm Roberta Gamble, Senior Vice President and Partner here at Frost & Sullivan, and I'll be your moderator today, as well as giving you some insights on the changing landscape in the energy industry. Before we get started today, we have a few housekeeping items that I'd like to go over. So throughout today's discussion, you can submit questions at any time, and we really encourage you to do that. Just type your question into the Ask a Question box, which is on the left-hand side of your screen, and click Send. So please do that, and at the end of the presentation, the last 15 minutes or so, we're going to be answering your live Q&A. And if we don't get to your question, ask it anyway, because we will then try to answer offline after the event. Now, if you're experiencing any problems throughout the program, please press F5 on your keyboard, and that will refresh your console, or you can close and relaunch the presentation. If you're continuing to have problems, please consult the Help tab, which you can find at the top right of your screen for tech support. We will be live tweeting during today's webinar, and you can follow the conversation on Twitter with the hashtag @FS_events. And last point of housekeeping, today's program will be available on demand by visiting www.frost.com/futureofenergy, all one word and no punctuation. Do please share the recording with your colleagues, with other contacts, and also feel free to revisit it in the future for some of the great information that we're going to be presenting today. So on today's call, I'm pleased to have E.G. Nandan, who's a Chief Architect and Strategist at Red Hat North America. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nandan, on this conversation.
You bet, Roberta. Looking forward to a great dialogue here.
Fantastic, me too. Well, before we get started on the presentation, we're going to put out a polling question. And this first poll is going to be, as you can see on your screen now, which of these describes the state of your organization's digital maturity? And the answers there, please choose one. You have no digital initiative yet. You're in the ambition stage, you're in the design stage, you're already in the delivery stage, you're in the scaling stage, or you are refining your current digital strategy. So we'll give everyone a moment there to answer that poll, and I very much look forward to looking at the results here at the end of the session before our Q&A. You want a minute longer? Okay, well, let's start talking about the tectonic shifts that we're seeing in the energy industry. We're seeing changes in demand, growing data driving new technologies, capabilities, and priorities. When you look at the energy industry today, it's arguably going under one of the most dynamic evolutions that we have seen in the last 150 years. The old silos, the old and arguably somewhat artificial barriers that used to separate upstream oil and gas production and the generation of electricity and of course the transmission and generation of electricity were always linked together, and the use of it, these things, these barriers, these walls are disintegrating as we see more oil and gas companies bringing on renewable energy to help balance their environmental position, but also their portfolio, as we see the power grid transforming from a monodirectional system to a matrix system, and we see the ubiquity of renewables really from all the way up from upstream into the user and even third parties. A part of all of this is the ubiquity of data. It's challenging, it's critical, and it's causing both a lot of opportunities and headaches for companies across the spectrum here. Many cross-industry trends that we're looking at, whether we're looking at oil and gas or power grid or third parties or private sector, public sector, really circle around workforce skill set gaps, a retiring workforce. We see a lot of cultural challenges like IT-OT divides, We see mounting environmental regulations, which are both driving these challenges, but also a lot of data is flowing in to help address those challenges. We see cyber threats, of course, definitely some very high-profile cyber threats that we've seen in the energy industry in the last few months, and also just an inability to modernize the technology and culture quickly enough. So we're seeing a lot of really earth-shattering changes happening in the industry in the last couple years. Digital transformation.
I'd like to chime in there.
Oh, of course.
Sure.
Yes, please. Go ahead. Yep.
In fact, on the previous slide, as you were talking, Roberta, what I was realizing was that, the energy sources, traditionally, the companies tend to think of, we are oil and gas. They are power grid. They're working on renewables and so on. Even though the energy sources are different, disparate, the fact that the threats, the challenges, the cyber threats, the IT/OT divide, it is pretty agnostic. It does not matter what the energy source is. The threats and challenges and the cultural aspects, they are common. And that's fascinating because it is, when you work together to circumvent a challenge, there is more to be, there is a lot more that we can do through cross-pollination and sharing ideas and so on, no matter what the energy source is. It's a fascinating world that we live in and are evolving to, Roberta.
That's an excellent point. The IoT challenges, cybersecurity, like you said, culture, these really are common as data becomes more ubiquitous, in some ways more subtle because it's everywhere, but more critical and more challenging. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And as we look at data, it's really coming from a lot of different places, and it is difficult for companies to manage and to find the derive fundamental benefits from it. We had a Frost & Sullivan survey that showed that some of the major challenges to digital transformation, the main thing restraining companies from really enacting their full digital transformation, were cultural. Being able to execute culture and change management. Again, I mentioned IT/OT collaboration issue, lack of corporate buy-in and investment. I mean, these are all cultural changes. And we actually see twice as many companies in 2020 saying that they don't have the internal expertise to, for example, overcome cloud hurdles. Twice as many companies are saying this than they did 2 years ago. And I think that's probably a combination of acknowledgement of how difficult it is, but also technology moving faster than any of us can keep up with, or at least a lot of these energy companies can keep up with. What are your thoughts on these two challenges?
Well, again, they are very common and they transcend the different energy sources. But I'm also looking at, the question that, what can we do about it? Is there kind of a global cure, so to speak? And what comes to mind is really, the ability to innovate and do what you have to do in the platform of your choice, in the environment of your choice. And what we cannot necessarily mandate is, use technology 1 or technology 2, and let's make that the standard going across all the companies, all the sectors in question here, the different energy companies. But what can be done to address these challenges is to have platforms that are open, platforms that are not only open, but so if the challenges are common, what if we had platforms that are open enough to address them in a consistent way? At the same time, kind of making the tweaks necessary depending on the underlying technology. That's the type of platforms we need. Otherwise, what happens is there may be best practices that are germane to, let's say, an oil and gas company or to a renewable energy company that we cannot readily apply it just because it is proprietary technology. And if we have open platforms, it is fascinating. I have seen it personally, even with the adoption of open source software. I've seen it kind of impacts how you think, how you work with others, the need to collaborate, and it goes beyond the firewalls, the sharing of data, and accelerating transformation and creating outcomes with, transparency, that actually takes us to a whole new world where it is not just about open platforms, Roberta. It's really having an open mindset. And that's really what we need, because if you talk about cybersecurity, the hackers, they are talking to each other. So if the impacted parties don't converse with each other, you're kind of trying to go solo against a whole world that is collaborating very well to their advantage and our disadvantage. Make sense?
So absolutely. So we need to out-collaborate the threat actors, basically, to be able to move forward. And to your point, if it changes the way you're thinking and it's changed the way you're interacting with others, that really, that directly addresses this left half of the chart, doesn't it? Which is those cultural challenges.
Absolutely. Here is how I would phrase it. Just to provide a reality check, it is, there are cultural challenges within the enterprise, and culture is more an output rather than the input. So that the ability to collaborate and the actual collaboration manifests itself into an open culture. However, that doesn't mean I wouldn't call it success. I wouldn't declare and open the bottle of champagne just because we achieved it within the enterprise. Real innovation and collaboration happens when you extend that type of mindset, the collaborative mindset, beyond the firewalls. So yes, you need to have an open culture within and also externally across the extended enterprise, Roberta.
Great. Well, that goes right into our next slide here, which is about the ecosystem. And so, whether you're looking at edge applications, like we have here on the left with IoT, managed security, in the energy industry, metering and AMI, cybersecurity across the whole ecosystem, or on the right when you're looking at everything from smart equipment in a smarter integrated system, feeding into intelligent operations, and then across that connected ecosystem. That's really kind of what you're getting at, isn't it? Is that this mindset, but also this way of sharing information and insights and learnings to all advance in this very competitive space.
Absolutely, Roberta. It is, I'm thinking of people like you and me, individuals, whether we are, homeowners, residences, and so on. We are the real customers in this space. And there is no one company that can do it all when it comes to providing the service that we need. It takes a village. It takes partnerships. It takes different components to come together. The simple act of flipping the switch on and the light coming or the water coming or, no matter what the energy source is, there is so much that goes behind the scenes. So yeah, without the ecosystem, it ain't going to work. It's going to be very chaotic.
Absolutely. Great points there. Good. Well, let's push out. We're going to talk about some specifics for different parts of the market, but let's first push out our second survey question. And this is a multiple selection one. We'd like to hear all of your answers on the second survey. And that is, which of the following technologies does your organization see as a game changer or as game changers for your energy transition initiatives? And as I said, do select any and all that apply. And we have AI and ML, business intelligence and data analytics, Internet of Things, cloud computing, including X as a service, digital overall, automation, whether that be physical or robotic, 5G, digital twins, network and communication modernization, and compute modernization. So there's a lot of things there to consider, but these are all technologies that are really driving the market today. So we'll give everyone maybe a couple more seconds than we did last time to answer which of those they think are really the most critical for your organization. And again, you can select more than one. Everyone a moment. Okay, we'll give you 2 more seconds. All right, great. Thank you. So if we look at the utility market now, and we'll look at a couple different, let's say, facets of this industry. I don't want to say segments because, as I said at the start, those segments are kind of merging and dissolving. But if we look at major market disruptions that we see in the utility industry, we're seeing challenges such as encroachment from third-party players, from oil and gas companies, from prosumers. So those would be consumers who take a proactive, back and forth approach in their usage and even selling and generating of power, and new power purchasing models. We're seeing the increase of renewable energy, of growing cybersecurity threats, which we also mentioned. I mean, if you think about it, utilities are so essential to a country's economy, and they have a lot of business information, a lot of personal identifiable information as well. So all these areas have to be managed, and then just the challenges of grid resilience. Fortunately, right now we're looking at entering hurricane season, but just in general, whether you're talking about that or whether you're talking about fires in the west, or you're talking about the heavy winters and summers that we've seen across Europe in recent years. There's a lot of challenges overall with grid resilience. And as a result, we're finding utilities are having to create new roles, new departments, develop new services, expand the value chain partners, expand the number of companies they're working with, and also grow their data and storage, which can come with costs and risks as well. They're needing to deal with legacy and unstructured data. Many utilities have been around for decades, even over 100 years, and a lot of them have been created through many years of merger and acquisition. So, they're amalgamations of different data lakes and silos that have to communicate with each other. And at the same time, the key utility goals are safety of their people, safety of their customers, energy efficiency and delivering it with efficiency, and of course remaining in compliance. So considering all of those multiple facets and challenges, Ananda, what do you think energy companies should prioritize? Can we even say what they should prioritize when they digitally evolve to keep ahead of these changes?
Well, I would say, what is interesting here, Roberta, is that the answer to this question is also, it goes across the different energy companies. It's not, it's not very different for oil and gas versus, renewable sources and so on. First off, the idea that, you have to rely on partners. What was interesting about the previous slide was that for each of the business challenge, there are many subsystems. We talk about the ecosystems, but there are subsystems of partners. So identifying what each enterprise is good at, let's face it, there are core competencies that enterprises take great pride and more power to them. So you grow that, but then you humbly acknowledge that there are certain things that there are others who do it better. That's what partnerships are about. And that's why I love the term right partners. Partnerships who can actually complement and extend and augment the core competencies that the enterprises bring to the table. It is not just about the right partners, it is the right subsystems of partners. I look at each bullet on the right column, because it says the challenges result in, and I love it because it actually speaks to a technology challenge with a direct relevance to the business challenge that the companies are encountering. So what should be prioritized is keeping the end consumer's needs in mind. Is the energy company really providing a competitive alternative? The business of utilities, the business of energy has evolved to like the business of retail, where it is no longer, hey, I'm the only store in town, and you just come here and I will give you power, water, electricity, whatnot. It is a different world where consumers have a choice. So the energy companies need to prioritize how they market the value proposition and make sure there is a value proposition. And to be holistic about it, they absolutely have to not only collaborate amongst themselves, but also with the partnership. And going back to the open platforms, that's the secret sauce. Because then what happens is they are then in a position to do what they want to do in the technology environment of their choice for the subsegment of the consumers that they are targeting. Those are the priorities, Roberta.
Great. That's good. That's a great way to think about it. Focus on the consumer's needs or the end user, I should say, not necessarily consumer. Are your actions having a positive impact there? But also, understanding that open platform is the way to deliver this, but also to connect with the growing number of ecosystem partners. Great, good stuff. So that's utilities. Now, if we look at sustainability overall, a lot of these changes, Nandan, would you agree a lot of these changes are being driven both, across the energy spectrum for sustainability reasons, whether mandatory or because they're emanating from within the organization?
Yes. So let me speak a little bit to the change in the mindset of the consumer. First, I would say I've been around in the industry for a few decades without divulging my age or anything, but I am seeing a mind shift in the next generation. I have kids in their 20-somethings, and just the way they make decisions around what they purchase, what kind of utility they choose to go with. It is more about how does that impact the environment. I am surprised. I will be dating myself. I am surprised at how important sustainability and environmental impact is to the next generation of consumers. So, if energy companies did not, again, give priority to not just the consumer of today, but also from environmental standpoint, if they don't do that, they're going to lose the consumer of tomorrow. That's a dumb deal. So the priority around achieving sustainability, there is a reason why you're seeing companies say, we will be carbon neutral from, 2030, 2050. They're putting dates out there, and executive compensation is actually tied to those goals being achieved. So companies that don't have such goals are, I'm sorry to say, they may not be around, quite frankly.
Right.
Because the consumer is changing. If there is no paying customer for the services provided, guess what? You're out of business.
Sure, and consumers have increasing amount of information and ability and the desire to research this. So even if a company is silent on the issue, that's going to speak more loudly, isn't it, as time goes on?
Absolutely.
So if we look at the wind industry, for example, and whether you're talking about owners and operators or manufacturers or, again, the oil industry or the private sector or utilities who are the major owners of wind power, they're dealing with a lot of data, aren't they? It's coming in through connected equipment, through processes, through suppliers, logistics, partners. We're seeing a lot of new technologies. A lot of wind turbines are relatively large and or inaccessible and somewhat dangerous to check on a human scale. So we see a lot of even a growing amount of remote condition monitoring, drones, UAVs being used. We're seeing the data being fed into digital twins to make turbines even more efficient. We're seeing predictive and prescriptive even maintenance coming out of condition monitoring coupled with machine learning and AI. We're seeing this information start to inform power purchase agreements and even influence government subsidies and programs. And of course, the wind industry, it still feels new, at least to me, there, but maybe I'm showing my age now, but it really has been around for decades now, hasn't it? So we're looking at trying to repower wind farms and increase the ROI. So that's a lot of data information, a lot of use for that data. How do you think the wind industry could use this data to optimize their operations or even in a bigger scale just to improve the industry? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I would say you touched upon it, Roberta, as you were talking. The need to modernize the existing infrastructure is important to start with. I mean, just like to take a metaphorical comparison to the data center, it's not just the applications, it is not just the data center, it is the infrastructure, the servers, and the connecting tissue, the integration technologies. I know I am talking, from an IT perspective, but there is a reason why I'm doing it. When I'm driving down rural Illinois someplace and I'm seeing all these, the windmills, let's say, and, I'm thinking they are like servers in a data center. And they need to, we talk about technical debt. Maybe there is like a natural resource type of debt that we have incurred with the infrastructure. So that needs to go through modernization. I couldn't agree more, number one, because the ability to collect data, when you talk about predictive maintenance, even better, prescriptive maintenance, so that you can mitigate the risk and even not allow the issue to occur in the first place, you need the right infrastructure in the first place. So that modernization is key, number one. Number two, there are many, different sensors and edge devices. So the cloud, the concept of data being, the analytics running in the cloud, it extends to the edge. I look at edge devices as just an extension of the hybrid cloud environment. And having that type of ability with all the sensors is also vital to leverage the data that is collected, but more importantly, apply analytics and AI/ML and data science. I will sound like a tape recorder, but there is a good reason why. When I talk about open platforms, I'm not just thinking of the developers. I'm not just thinking of the operators. I'm also thinking of the data scientists. The ability to run AI/ML machine learning models on open platforms matters, because just like you could get data from a multitude of different devices in different shapes and forms, structured, unstructured, it could be a drone that is actually collecting visual data that you need to parse and then do some imaging techniques to actually decipher what is being seen. So all kinds of data needs to be processed, integrated, analyzed, and to do that as well, you need open platforms and modernized styles of integration. Minus that, I see efficiency being status quo.
Right. So that data platform is really what's going to push the efficiency opportunity further. It's not just about connecting like we talked about earlier on across the ecosystem, but it's really about making the most of that data. We really can't do it without it, sounds like, or it'd be very difficult.
Absolutely.
Great. Good stuff. So moving on to solar power and the private sector. So we've done some research here at Frost & Sullivan, and it's quite interesting. Even though a lot of solar power is still owned by utilities, the private sector is really a driving force in owning and operating solar power, photovoltaic power. And I think this goes back to the consumer trends that you mentioned, Nandan, a couple slides ago. We see in the U.S. private sector solar power has grown 1,500% in the last 10 years, and over 300 major businesses across industries, chemicals, electronics, hospitality, food and beverage, finance, have signed the Renewable Energy 100 initiative, which means they want to be 100% renewable by 2050, which is putting that stake in the ground, which you'd mentioned as well, and making their executive teams accountable for that. And there's a lot of unique challenges, I think, that face the private sector, especially with these big companies, because they have, operations around the world. They have offices and perhaps manufacturing or distribution, around the world, and each of those different locations are going to have a different amount of sun exposure, a different renewable energy credits, different power prices, different net metering or tariff opportunities. So if you're a global company and you want to improve your environmental footprint or go 100% renewable, you've got to look at all these different considerations, which again are driven by or express themselves as data, to figure out what's the most efficient way to do that. So how do you think data can help these entities when they have these dispersed assets? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, great question there, Roberta. So I have to, every time I hear about these forest fires and and like it or not, we have been hearing a lot about these thunderstorms and hurricanes, and it's almost like if there is something going on in the east, then there is something else going on in the west. I'm speaking more about North America, United States at least, and there is always this mention that there is going to be increased focus on solar power and the renewable sources because of all these things that are happening, because a tree falls down and then boom, there is outage. The first thing that we hear when there is a fire or a thunderstorm is power outage. How many consumers are impacted? Hundreds of thousands and millions and whatnot, depending on how severe the natural event is. So there are other drivers where solar power is definitely looked at as another alternative. Even if it is a plan B in current times, it is still a viable alternative that is getting more and more attention because the moment if I don't have power, I'm going to go asking, okay, where can I get it, rather than just wait for the traditional forms of energy to for it to be turned on, like I don't know, 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 months later, who knows. So there is that driver in addition to what we spoke about earlier. Now, if I am a consumer or a customer of my electricity, my power company locally, I am also a customer of the city that I live in, the county that I live in, the state that I live in. I'm a citizen. I'm a resident of the city that I am living in. So in a way, the mayor, the city government, is actually providing services that are coming together to make the quality of life better for us as citizens. And guess what the city needs with all the sensors that are in place? I mean, you could even throw in traffic sensors and traffic signals and different types of devices that they use to capture data about, what works, doesn't work, and so on. And utility companies are key to, what types of data they provide, and so on. So the answer to your earlier question about how does the private sector and public sector come together, it goes back to sharing data not just between the different energy companies. It's also about sharing it with in a B2B manner. The local governments are very interested in getting that type of data. And if it gets into some kind of governance issue saying our data, it stays with us and we won't provide and so on, it is to the detriment of the quality of life that you and I can enjoy, Roberta.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and that's actually as I was going to go is into the city side of that. So that's the private sector side of that. Definitely behooves them to work very closely with not just utility, but the city and so forth, and then cities themselves are trying to become smarter. Here at President Sullivan, when we look at quote unquote smart cities, we don't just look at energy. We recognize they're trying to improve mobility, which would be transport, traffic, so on and so forth, improve education. Especially with the rise of e-learning in the last year and a half here. They want to improve health and telemedicine, which is actually very closely tied to mobility if you think about it. Traffic is stressful, traffic congestion is polluting. You want ambulances and first responders to get to where they need to be quickly. And then smart buildings, which has a very close connection with smart energy. Net zero is very much where commercial buildings are going, and it's really hard to do net zero if you're not an efficient business. It's probably generating, if at least storing, power on site. So cities are looking at a lot of things, but definitely energy is top on that. And they're trying to connect, departments. They're trying to improve residents. They're trying to maintain data security. And I think when we think of the government, we do think of maybe some bureaucratic challenges and so forth as well. So what's the message for cities connecting all these different departments and residents while still maintaining data security? I mean, can they do that with an open platform, or are there some concerns there?
Well, so when I said open platform, I certainly didn't mean a platform that can be easily accessed or any such thing. Open there means it can run anywhere. It can actually be agnostic to the underlying technology environment. But I will say it better be an open, secure platform. And what I mean by that is, data security should not be an afterthought. Whether you're talking about the edge device, whether you're talking about the sensor, whether you're talking about your smart meters, whether it is the servers, the cloud, and any of the above, security starts, it should be proactive right from the hardware, the firmware, the operating system, the container platform, the connecting technology. It should not be an afterthought. It should be proactive. And in fact, we talk about partners. I was actually, having a conversation with a different team where the idea is to try hacking your own enterprise as if you are the hacker. And this way you can try to find out, if you have a different team that is proactively trying to break into the very data that you are protecting and have some kind of gamification going, I would much rather know from the teams within what could go wrong, what could fall into the wrong hands, what are the loopholes, rather than waiting to find out and be in the news with some ransom amount attached to it. So taking such proactive steps and making sure that the platform is robust, not just from the bottom, the hardware, all the way up to, to the end user, that's really number one. Number two, I'm looking at the slide and it says data security, but compliance matters too from a federal regulation standpoint. And it could be, especially when you're talking about cities and so on, they could be federal issues, their compliance regulations, state, local. So automating not only the patching, but also the mechanisms to conform to these regulations, the technical controls that ensure that they are, in place, will go a long way in maintaining data security, and more importantly, the privacy of the citizens' data.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of compliance, there, I would, you think of a city, you think there's a lot of moving parts, or even a large organization. There's a lot of moving parts, and just putting together those compliance reports, or just having visibility across an organization. There must be some benefits there too, right, on the open platform side. And we talked about culture early on, and we talked about ecosystem, but just having that pan-organizational visibility and optimizing operations, that's got to figure in, right?
Absolutely. Now, what I have seen is it works better if you require, so when we talk about partners, yes to what you said, but I just want to extend that. It is not just compliance within the enterprise. It is the third party, the fourth party, the fifth party, who you are working with as an enterprise. So going back to the slide where it said the right partners, I would actually boldface that and flashing red neon signs, because the partners have to be compliant too. Because depending on who the end, I couldn't care less. Even though I'm advocating partnerships, when it comes to, I hang up here and go back to my personal life, I'm a consumer. Right. And, it doesn't matter how many partners my local company is working with, or the state government, local government, they better comply to all the, regulations. And I don't even want to know how they do that. I'm a citizen. I want to enjoy my personal life. My quality of my life matters. So from that standpoint, the direct company that I'm working with is accountable to be compliant, whether they avail services from other partners. So the compliance takes on a whole new, I would say, a different magnitude, Roberta, especially when you are taking on the, be accountable for the compliance of not just what you are providing, but also the components of the solution that you're providing to your end consumer.
Yeah, definitely. You're only as compliant or secure or efficient, as your partners at the end of the day, successful. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's push out our third survey here. And before we get to some summary statements and then the Q&A, so which statement regarding the IT-OT convergence do you agree with more? And those answers there are IT-OT convergence is among the top factor affecting our ability to meet our strategic goals. Or B, IT/OT is one of the many factors affecting our strategic goals, our ability to meet our strategic goals. Or the third question, or answer rather, C, IT/OT convergence is not a key factor affecting our ability to meet our strategic goals. So, in other words, how much is IT and OT convergence impacting your ability to meet strategic goals and digital transformation? Is it A, top factor, B, one of many factors, or C, not a top or key factor? So give everyone a moment. Of course, that is just a one question, one answer, unlike the last one, which is multiple choice. So let us know where you fall there, and do really appreciate everyone's participation in our polls. Let's give everyone a second there. Okay, so let us know. I suspect a lot of the audience is going to have a very clear idea of whether or not IT/OT is one of many or not really a consideration. But we'll see. We'll see when we get the answers here in a moment. So making the right infrastructure work for oil and gas industry, for utilities, for other energy businesses. You know, some of the key takeaways that we've heard on today's conversation, and you know, we come to when we think about really the digital changes in the industry, are things such as the right infrastructure, and I would add the right partners, as you said as well, and being right-sized with your solution. You want to reduce risks, whether that's repatriation, capital costs, which you might find, you know, when your data is expanding and the measurement of your data is expanding if you don't manage it well. Of course, security. We've heard a lot today about an open and secure platform across value chains and internal processes, and being, you know, just in general flexible and as future-proof, quote unquote, as you can be. So these are some of the key takeaways. If a company were to think of their next steps, like what are the critical next steps that an energy company has to consider? These are some things that are important, but you know, what are the steps they take to achieve them?
Yeah, I would say overarching, companies should position themselves to be able to deal with change. The change is what we have seen in the last 20 months or so that we have been subject to globally. So the ability to deal with change and be dynamic, both from a business standpoint as well as a technology standpoint. So a critical next step is to make sure that not only do they have a platform where they can innovate today, and I want to, you know, repeat a word. I want to, cue off a word that you used, a phrase, future-proof. The technology investments that they make should not only be open, but they should be future-proof. What exactly does that mean? Change manifests itself in different ways. The consumer mindset can change, like we spoke about earlier, you know, tending more towards sustainability. The markets can change. It's a market which is more like retail and less like how utilities used to be. So there is that. But then there is also change more from a technology standpoint, which is where the future proofing comes in. You want to go with platforms that where you are in for the ride, where you can actually continue to transform. Transformation is not a one-time thing. It continues. So today, you know, as you are modernizing, you should be cognizant of how can you continue that on a sustained basis so that it is more amenable to the changing markets, the changing consumer demands, and so on. So that's the overarching theme. Now, how does that manifest itself into next steps? Number one, take stock of what's the infrastructure that is in place today, and that goes across, whether it be the wind infrastructure, whether it is the solar infrastructure, whether it is the existing oil and gas, whoever you are, take stock of that, number one. Number two, target, here is what our environment needs to look like to address the consumer of today and the consumer of tomorrow. Number three, take a look at what your core competencies are. What are you known for? What sells? Why would the end consumer pay a dime for what you have to offer today just by yourself? And then revisit the partnerships that you have so that it all brings together the ability to change overall. And remember, I go back to the right partners. The right partners are those who can also change at the same pace, if not faster, as you can. So those are the steps that I would say. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you are on an open transformation journey as needed and, change in a timely manner. Two sets of words that I would, leave you with: open platforms, right partners.
Great.
There you go,
Great.
Roberta.
Those are great steps there, and great suggestions. Thank you for that. So we've got one more survey question here before we move on to look at the answers in the Q&A section. So for our fourth and last survey question, we really want to hear from you and learn how we can keep the conversation going with Red Hat. You can choose, and this is also a multiple choice, you can choose to subscribe to Red Hat's content, which includes blogs, infographics, and white papers on the topic. You can schedule a one-on-one meeting with Red Hat, and Red Hat is also offering participants of today's webinar the opportunity for a demo. So do please choose any of all of these that you'd like, and you can use to learn more about the topic or connect more directly with Red Hat. Great. So thank you, Nandan. And let's now look at those poll results.
Okay, great. Thanks for filling in that last survey. Now, it looks like we don't actually have the survey results right this moment. So Nandan, I think we'll just go right into Q&A. Now, if you'd like to know what the results of our polling questions were, though, to the audience, do just put a note in the Q&A field. Just ask us to send you the results, and we'll have someone from Red Hat follow up and get you those answers so you can learn how your fellow participants replied on the survey results. Right. So, Nandan, you ready for some Q&A?
You bet, Roberta. Take it away.
Fantastic. All right. So our first question here, kind of a long one. So it says, Red Hat has a huge influence in open source software industry. What can Red Hat do to push open source culture in the IT hardware industry? I can imagine that these energy companies are tied to various, quote, closed IT hardwares. So that's a great question. What are your thoughts on that?
Yep, that's kind of our foundation. I mean, I go back, decades back when Linux came about. It was really the operating system that was neutral to, we had, at that time, there were, proprietary operating systems, and Linux was adopted because it could pretty much run on any hardware. It does not have to be specific proprietary to the hardware vendor. At that time, there were multiple flavors of Unix going on. And that's really why it caught on. You don't care where you run, period. And in today's world, to the point of the question, the huge influence in the open source software industry, we see that pattern even from a container standpoint, which are pretty much the new Linux, if you will, can run on any cloud provider, in data center, bare metal, virtualized environments, and so on. So the point about culture is well made. Now, when it comes to open hardware, really it is, it starts with the adoption of platforms that could run anywhere. That said, what we are seeing is, there is a new model emerging when it comes to hardware where it is about having, deflecting some of the processing to be done in, GPUs and other processing units, which would to offload entire software subsystems like networking or storage with cloud-like security isolation. We refer to these more as intelligent compute units. And what is good about these is, there is a common trait where they are employing an easily programmable multi-core CPU with state-of-the-art interfaces, powerful set of networking, storage, security accelerators. That model, we see that being adopted more and more. And with the proliferation of not only the traditional hardware that is already in existence, but with more and more sensors and edge devices, the need to be open is, if you cannot collaborate on a common hardware platform or at least have the ability to have these interfaces, you will be hard pressed to be competitive, period. Because as we said, the collaboration is key, and having that type of open hardware is fundamental. So I'm not here to say that we can change the hardware industry overnight, but like everything else, this type of change takes time. And it really helps with the continuous injection of that open culture that, as was pointed out in the question, we have come to be known for. So it is through influence and technical abilities that we intend to influence that and lead us to that open hardware framework, if you will, Roberta.
Sure. No, that's a great point. Yeah, it's really necessary, and Red Hat's in a good position to move that forward. Okay, so similar to that, we have another question about the adoption of quantum computing in the energy industry and how that's being addressed by Red Hat.
Absolutely. It's actually related in a way. Now, there is a huge paradigm shift. Everything that I answered in the previous question has to do more with traditional classical computing, where you flip a bit, 0 or 1. It has got 2 states. Now, quantum computing is more about, you could have multiple states, just not a 0 and 1, and that kind of changes the types of problems that can be addressed. From an energy, you can actually think about solving problems that could not even be attempted from a classical computing perspective. And in the energy industry, especially around chemicals and petroleum, we see, the chemical product design, refining processes, seismic imaging with AI/ML, and these are, especially, predicting the next drilling location and so on. It is very important that lots of data be processed different ways in, using a completely different paradigm. And that's where we are seeing the, at least the experimentation. To say that it is full-fledged adoption in, production, we are yet to get there. But that being said, when companies have a research and development arm, and with due respect, sometimes we refer to them more as mad scientists, if you will, for good reason. They are thinking out into the future. We do see the injection of, hey, can quantum computing address this? Now, from a Red Hat perspective, the way we don't have any plans we are not a hardware company, so there is no plans to develop quantum hardware. But just in the spirit of collaboration, we are actively working to define how the classical and the quantum worlds can be connected together. To expect that existing classical environments just migrate en masse to a quantum hardware, that would not be fair either. In fact, there is no such need, because truth be told, there are some problems that are better left in the classical computing world. They are actually better suited. It's not that quantum completely addresses all of the classical problems and even more. There is an overlap. There is an intersection. So what we are doing is taking steps that would actually enable the two to coexist. And this way, you could, just like the previous question, you could think of quantum computers as co-processors for classical computers. You have GPUs, you have QPUs, quantum processing units. And with the Red Hat OpenShift, what we are doing is, providing the best for the classical compute, but also extending that from a quantum experience standpoint. Case in point, the Qiskit community is an open source community. Qiskit is an open source community that is, championed by IBM, the quantum experience. And we have built operators that actually target quantum algorithm scientists for Kubernetes, which is the open source project corresponding to OpenShift. And these operators automate the installation, configuration of development environments. And longer term, the plan is to work with a growing number of quantum computing providers and build similar operators for their quantum environments. including those that can be accessed via the cloud. There you go, Roberta.
That's good. That's good. That's good. So it's the right fit message, kind of like what we have with the cloud. Make sure you have the right cloud, whether that's hybrid or on. It may be on-prem, it may be on cloud services on-prem. It could be fully on the cloud. It's kind of like the same, similar message, similar theme. Make sure you have the right fit for your application, for your system, for your business.
Absolutely.
Great. So next we're going to switch gears a little here. We've got a question about digital transformation. And so hybrid cloud sounds like a great idea. Sorry, that's the next question. Let me try the one before that. This question is, I feel my organization is far along in its digital transformation journey, but we're still not seeing ROI. Is it better to fix it in pieces, hit restart, or do something else?
Well, the first step really, we did talk about next steps that could be taken, towards the end there. But then the first step is to kind of see how you are doing even before embarking on the transformation journey. Whoever posed the question, I would say, they are not alone. When I talk to customers, I absolutely see, we have already been doing this, but where is the return? The line of business could be asking the CIO, hey, we are investing, we are going to the cloud, we are doing all this stuff, but how is my day, in my work life changing? How is the work life changing for our customers? And where is the return? Now, any ROI exercise, it's really, it first starts with how are we doing today? And having that ability to capture the metrics of number one, what are the metrics and how are they being measured? And how are we doing today? That's a key question, because otherwise there is no baseline for comparison. So I see that, and truth be told again, that when you're going through the transformation, the metrics shift as well, because it is more there are some parameters. There are some obvious parameters. Time to deploy, how long does it take to provision, and the DevOps lifecycle. All of those are obvious parameters. But then there are some other parameters that come in play as well, depending on your enterprise. So how do those compare to the baseline is very key. And any project, if it cannot be aligned to a business outcome, you are going to be hard-pressed. So direct answer to the question, I wouldn't say, it has to be a restart because, the ROI is not available, or it is, you're not seeing the return. It would be a good idea to, if you can, sometimes you have to kind of I do that. I go back and look at my emails 2 years old sometimes. And, how were we doing? And then kind of see how are we doing today? And I think you will find some answers slowly begin to surface. So that's my take on that, Roberta.
It might not just be the amount of ROI, or if you're seeing ROI, it might be how you're calculating it or how you're considering it. It might be reverberating in other parts of the organization that you hadn't quite considered. So that could be part of the answer. Great. Okay, good. And we're just about the top of the hour, so we've got time just for one more question. It's the one I started saying before. Hybrid cloud sounds like a great idea, but how does a business avoid having two teams, such as an on-prem and a cloud team? And how do we get them to work together? So is it actually, we go to the cloud for simplicity and agility and flexibility, but is it also adding complexity? How do you get around that?
Yeah, well, the easy answer is to make it transparent so that the two teams are not even aware where those workloads are. Wouldn't it be nice to have a platform that goes across so that the experience is the same, whether you are the developer, the operator, no matter where you are, whether you are on-prem or you are in the cloud? And, the question is phrased as one for on-prem and one for cloud. I will make it even more complex. One for on-prem and, one each for different cloud providers. So if you have 3 cloud providers, you could have 4 teams, let alone 2. So the real key, I go back to those magic words. There were 2 sets of magic words I ended with: open platforms, right partners. So the open platforms, I have to say, I can talk about that all day long, but really that's the key. If the platform is open And if it is agnostic to whether you are on bare metal or hypervisor or on an Amazon environment or a Google environment or Microsoft Azure, it does not matter. It shouldn't matter to the team. The reason why the teams come across as being different is because their experiences are different. If we make sure that the platform is the same, it's like, hey, you and I are doing the same thing. Let's go to lunch.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Good. No, that's a great answer. So we're just at the top of the hour, so I just wanted to thank everyone today for joining our event. If we did not get to your question, we will follow up with you, and anybody that wanted to follow up from Red Hat or the survey results will follow up with you as well. And as I mentioned, you can find the recording of this online, and we definitely encourage everybody to listen to it again and share it with your colleagues and other contacts. So thank you so much for your time today, Nandan, and appreciate it, and hope everyone enjoyed the event. Thank you.